What if events had unfolded differently in the MCU timeline? What if Tony Stark didn't die from the power of wielding the Infinity Stones when he snapped in Avengers Endgame? What if in another universe, Stark had found a way to live? In today's highly requested video, I will be asking the question, what if? That being said, let's dive right into this Marvel's fan fiction. The battle had been hard for the heroes, being caught off guard while Thanos and his armies started raining fire on the Avengers compound. The timeline is the same as the original, where the big three fought Thanos in close quarters combat duel. Near the end of the fight, Thanos had attained the Infinity Gauntlet after knocking out Captain Marvel with the Power Stone. Stark looked in the distance, Doctor Strange extending his finger out, telling Tony that this was his moment. This is how they would win the battle. While Stark knew this might kill him, he didn't have a choice but to try. Thanos smirked before trying to snap until Iron Man rushed in, punching and trying to distract Thanos. His armor had absorbed the stones without Thanos knowing. The Mad Titan beat Tony to the ground and snapped, but nothing had happened. The snap echoed in the air, but no power went off. He looked in shock, watching as Stark's arm lit up from the Infinity Gauntlet, piercing right through his skin. The raw power felt good. Tony said, "I am Iron Man," snapping away Thanos and his armies. While at the same time, Tony was teleported to the Soul Stone. He thought he was dying, and Tony was surprised to see who it was. It was his daughter, Morgan. She cried, giving him a hug, where Tony knew he couldn't leave his family. Iron Man needed to live, no matter what the costs. She asked Tony what it took, and Tony cried. He didn't know what to say, but before he could say anything, Tony woke up breathing heavily. He saw Rhodes and Pepper, who sat his body up. Tony tried to talk, and Rhodes asked him what he needed, and Tony replied to remove the gauntlet immediately. Spider-Man dropped below with tears streaming down his face as Tony faded away. Rhodes removed the Infinity Gauntlet, but Tony's hand had melted. Parker told them they needed to do something before Doctor Strange and the Hulk walked towards Peter. Strange opened a portal and grabbed him. Stark was sent to a hospital where they removed his suit from the damage, but the nanobots on Tony's hand had been fried, ruining half of his bloodstream in his arm. This caused the doctors to remove Tony's left arm. He was on life support, but he was still alive. The rest of the Avengers stood still after the battle was diminished. They won, but with the cost that Tony could be dead. Captain America slowly walked up to the group, and Steve told Spider-Man that they should regroup. He said Stark is strong and that he will survive his injuries. They agreed. As the heroes walked away from the debris, they returned to Stark's home. Debating on the next course of action with the Infinity Stones, Steve Rogers told them how he would be the one to send them back. Now, this timeline could continue the same as the MCU, where the Avengers broke up due to some of them departing ways, but this time, I want to keep things around for the next significant threat. Captain America grabbed the case that had all of the stones, but Thor put his hand on Rogers' shoulder. He said the Captain needs a break. He should visit Tony in the hospital. Thor explained that he knew his intentions, but told Steve that he would be living a lie in his entire life. Rogers thought about it, going back in time, living with Peggy in the 40s, but he also knew that he couldn't change the past and what happened. Steve had a tear in his eye when he decided he would stay with the Avengers. If they needed a Captain America, the world needed a symbol. Thor would be the one to take the stones back to their original points in time. Steve went into Tony's house where they were watching a video log before the time traveling had happened. Tony's hologram told them how he might die an untimely death, but it wouldn't be the end. This motivated Rogers, and he knew that this wouldn't be the end for the Avengers, but the destruction of Thanos and his armies would only be the beginning steps. Steve looked to see the young man who fought side by side with Iron Man against Thanos' army. Steve waited for the message to come to an end. Peter gave Pepper a hug, leaving the house. He walked outside, opening the door to his surprise when he saw Steve Rogers. Peter asked what he was doing here, and Peter thought that Cap was going to bring the stones back. Captain America smiled, and he said that he had a change of heart. Peter looked to his left to see Thor returning from the time machine, where Thor reverted to his normal self. Steve said, "Tony told me you were an Avenger now." Peter was shocked to hear that Tony told him this. Peter agreed that he was an Avenger and asked what they were going to do going forward. Peter said, "I don't know what to do if Mr. Stark doesn't make it." Peter put his head down, but Steve encouraged Peter that Tony would make it. It's something he does. Steve asked Peter to come with him to the hospital, and Peter wasn't sure. He wanted to see how Stark was, but knew that he needed to rest. Cap said that maybe instead of visiting him, Peter could work on his training. Peter asked what he meant by this training, whereas Steve replied that when they fought at the airport in Germany a few years ago, his fighting skills were terrible. Rogers made it clear that Peter was flawed and needed significant training if he would become a full-time member of the Avengers. At the same time, Tony woke up, and everything around him was distorted, but Tony saw himself fighting someone on top of the Statue of Liberty. He turned to his left, and Peter's dead body laid there motionless, before he saw a man in a hood striking him with a blade. Tony used his arc reactor on his chest, blasting the man's face off. Still, Tony noticed that Parker's blood was on his hands. Tony woke up shaking in the hospital bed. Happy, who was with him this whole time, phoned Pepper that Tony had awoken. Pepper quickly made her way to the hospital. Happy asked Tony if he was going to be okay, and Tony was motionless in the hospital bed. He looked at his arm, which was gone after he performed the snap. All Tony said was, "Where's Pepper?" Happy told him to hang on tight as she was almost there. Tony told Happy if any of this was real, and Happy was confused and told Tony that he was still alive, and that they won the battle. Pepper walked into the hospital where they kept Stark in a giant room along with Happy Hogan. She stepped inside, running to Tony's aid. She asked how he was, and he replied how she was doing. Happy looked at Pepper. They both knew that something was wrong with Tony. It was like his PTSD came back, but this was a lot worse. Tony yelled, saying that he wanted to go home, and started ripping apart wires that connected to his ventilator. Tony noticed that none of this was real before noticing that his left arm was gone. He was horrified by the sight of it. Pepper and Happy told Stark to calm down. Tony was about to get up, but the doctors restrained him. Tony told Friday to boot up the systems. The nanobots in his blood created his armor before Tony broke free from the hospital. They told him to stand down. Pepper cried, pleading to Tony that he was sick, but Stark didn't listen before blasting a hole through the hospital, flying away. The sky looked warped. Tony started flying, but he felt like he was going to get sick before landing on a nearby building rooftop. Tony knew that he needed to get home and went back to his house. He opened the door. He yelled Morgan's name, and she ran down the stairs to see him, but she knew something was amiss before Tony fell to the ground in his armor. She asked if he was okay, where Tony cried, hugging her. Tony needed reassurance that he still had a family. Pepper and Happy bursted into the house, tracking where Tony was, using his armor. They saw that he was on the floor, hugging Morgan. They all came in to hug Tony, who passed out on the floor. Having woke up to yet another nightmare, Tony felt different. After a few days of being with his family, he recovered from most of his injuries. Tony got off of the couch where he went outside to the lake. He looked to see past the lake where his old arc reactor was floating. He smiled, and he thought that now that Thanos has been destroyed, he could work closely on new projects that could save the world if a new threat were to happen again. But the PTSD was getting worse. Tony started having flashbacks of the ultimate power and how it felt on him. He missed wearing the gauntlet, but it showed him visions of his future and other realities. Tony fell to his knees, trying to breathe. It took him some time, but he snapped back to reality. A truck door slammed, and Tony turned around to see Steve Rogers coming out of the truck. Steve was shocked to see Stark's face. Half of his face was scarred from the Infinity Gauntlet. Tony and Steve shook hands, and Cap said that he was happy that Tony made it out, and knew that deep down, he was the one to make the final play. Steve said to Tony that if he was feeling alright, and Tony replied that Steve just didn't know what the Infinity Stones felt like, to have such power. Steve looked, seeing that Tony's left arm was missing. Steve asked Tony to be part of the Avengers again. Stark took a deep breath, telling Rogers not to ask that question. He said it could be anything else but that, and Rogers said he's been training the kid for some time and was doing well. Rogers said that he hopes to see you again, and Stark said, "Not like this," as he gazed at his missing arm. Steve knew that something was off with Tony, but he might need time to get over things. Steve said that if he ever needs anything, to give him a call. Stark was glad that Peter was being trained, but he needed to be there too for him. Tony nodded his head before Steve got back into his truck, leaving. Tony stopped talking to visitors, taking calls, and shut himself from the world for 8 months. Peter Parker tried to contact Tony Stark, but every time he tried, the calls would fail manually, because Stark was depressed and scared at the nightmares he was getting every day. The nightmares were getting worse, and his PTSD was higher than ever. Tony built a massive underground basement, almost like his original room, where he made machines, armor, and more Stark weapons. Thinking another Thanos might happen anytime soon, Tony was rapidly building, and he was making resources. He resorted to drinking, where he became an alcoholic. Pepper asked Tony to stop, and Tony replied that he can't. He said the next Thanos was coming, and because of this, he needed to create a suit of armor that could tank it. An almost godlike armor was being developed. Pepper cried. She couldn't reason with Tony anymore. He was becoming like his old self, but worse. He spent less time with Morgan because of the constant thought of losing the two of them. Tony kept sighing that it was for their own good, or he would make the excuse of tough love. Pepper said it wasn't love, and he lost his mind. Tony screamed at Pepper, and he didn't even look at her. He just kept building his next best armor. Everywhere on the news, people asked, "Where is Tony Stark?" Tony watched the news and knew that he needed to come back to show the world that the Avengers would never be messed with ever again. Stark finished his suit that was utterly silver, and he named it the Superior Mark I. At the same time, a breaking news story hit. Stark looked on the news to hear that a massive creature had been stopped in Mexico by the name of Mysterio. While Fury and Maria Hill investigated the storm, they came across someone who started to stop it. The man defeated the elemental before approaching Fury. Fury recruited him, but this time in our universe, Mysterio wouldn't reveal his true name or even take his mask off due to Stark still being alive. And that is going to be part 1 of what if Tony Stark had lived in Avengers Endgame. Now, we are going into Far From Home territory, and we will eventually go into Spider-Man No Way Home territory, but I hope you guys enjoyed the first part of what if Tony Stark didn't die in Avengers Endgame, and where he actually lived. Where would you like to see the story go? Would you like to see Iron Man become evil, or would you like to see Iron Man become good again? That being said, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn your notifications on, so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But anyways, as always guys, thanks for tuning in, and have a fantastic day.